They told me the mission didn't exist. There was no launch, no manifest, no official documentation. And the funding? Buried under layers of black budget operations, so deep even ghosts wouldn't find it. That alone should have made me walk. But there was something about the offer that snagged at the back of my mind. An itch, like a half-remembered dream. Or maybe it was the number of zeros at the end of the check. Still, something about the way they said, "We chose you specifically," didn't sit right. We landed on the far side of the moon 6 days ago, in a crater where sunlight never reaches. There's no echo up here. No birds. No wind. Just the groan of metal boots on dust and the empty hum of your own breath. It's colder than any place I've ever known. Cold enough that even the shadows feel sharp. I'm writing this because someone has to. Just in case. Just in case what we find never makes it back. There were 4 of us. Commander Elias Voss, military through and through, the kind of man who wears discipline like second skin. You could tell from his posture, from the way he scanned every corner like he expected it to shoot back. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Dr. Lena Moreau, a xenogeologist with a brain like a supernova. Brilliant, intense, and a little too eager to be here. She carried herself like someone chasing a myth. Someone who wanted to believe the universe was stranger than textbooks dared to admit. Thompson, our engineer, younger than the rest of us. Smart, twitchy. He treated the equipment like it was sacred, whispering to wires, coaxing life out of metal. Jittery hands, wide eyes. He smoked too much, talked too fast, and always seemed like he was trying not to say something. And then there was me. I used to be someone else, a soldier, a pilot, an astronaut. Whatever the badge said back then doesn't matter now. Let's just say I got too close to something I wasn't supposed to see, and NASA dropped me like a hot iron. Years later, someone remembered that incident. Remembered me. And when they needed someone who could keep his mouth shut, they called. We touched down in the basin at lunar dusk. Not that it matters. This place hasn't seen sunlight in billions of years. Our lander, the Persephone, sank low on hydraulics, kicking up thick clouds of regolith that hung in the air like frozen smoke. Voss checked his HUD and turned toward us. Move fast. No chatter unless it's critical. Lena adjusted her visor and looked out over the black horizon. Creepy as hell, she muttered. You expected moonlight and poetry. I asked. I expected ruins, not a tomb. We deployed the rover and began the silent crawl across the crater floor. The terrain was rough, peppered with jagged stone and ancient meteor scars, but it was the quiet that got to you. The kind that made your own heartbeat sound unnatural. We were headed to a specific set of coordinates, marked only in a faded classified document dated 1962. No explanation, just a single line beneath a Cold War satellite image. Potential entry point, unidentified subsurface structure. That kind of language doesn't show up in government files without meaning. 3 hours in, Thompson finally spoke up. Anybody else getting that vibration? What vibration? Voss asked. Like a hum. Real low. Not in the comms. In my teeth. I clenched my jaw. He was right. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A deep tremor just beneath the bones. Not seismic. Not mechanical. More like something alive. Breathing, maybe. Voss said nothing. At 0400 hours, we reached the site. A sheer rock face. Smooth. Geometrically perfect. It jutted from the crater floor like a blade. We dismounted, approaching it with slow, reverent steps. No markings. No visible seams. Nothing should look like that, Lena whispered. Not here. Thompson tapped it with a probe. The sound it made wasn't right. Too deep. Too long-lasting. Like hitting hollow titanium. Voss unslung the core drill from his back. We open it. The machine whirred to life, biting into the rock with an angry screech. Sparks flew. Then, an impact. A shudder through the ground. And just like that, the wall sighed. It wasn't air. Not exactly. More like pressure giving way. The surface split down the center, a seam revealing itself. Two have slid apart, and the earth beneath us shook as the passage opened. A corridor descended into shadow. Lena was already scanning. Metal alloy, partially organic. This isn't human. Voss nodded once. We go in. Tight formation. No separation. I hesitated at the threshold. Not out of fear. Instinct. The doorway wasn't inviting. It was watching. Inside, our helmet lights cast strange shadows across the walls. Smooth, curved, etched with patterns that squirmed when you looked too long. Some resembled language. Others diagrams? Memories? I wasn't sure. They flickered at the edge of thought, like half-remembered nightmares. The air was wrong. There's atmosphere, Linus said. Trace elements, high nitrogen content. And it's warm. Any contaminants? Voss asked. None. It's sterile. The further we went, the warmer it got. The walls began to pulse faintly, responding to our presence. Floor panels lit under our boots, illuminating a path ahead. The hum was louder now, climbing out of the marrow into the ears. We reached an antechamber. Octagonal, 20 feet high. Something was mounted on the far wall, metallic, spherical, and covered in hexagonal ports. I don't like this, Thompson whispered. We shouldn't be here. No one's forcing you, Voss snapped. That's the problem. Something is. I was about to say something when I noticed it. A boot, half buried in dust. Hold up, I said, crouching. This is Earth-made. Current gen. Lena knelt beside me. That's not possible. No one's been here before. Thompson's voice trembled. Guys. He was standing at the mouth of a side hallway, staring at the wall. What is it? Voss demanded. There's bones. We gathered around. A human skeleton slumped against the wall, still clad in a suit marked with an old NASA logo. The design hadn't been used in over a century. The suit was torn at the chest, and the helmet was shattered from within. Inside the visor, what was left of it, were deep gouges as if fingernails had tried to claw their way out. Impossible, Lena said, her voice distant. No missions here. None that returned. Anyway, I turned to Voss. What the hell is this? But he wasn't looking at the body. He was staring down the corridor. Frozen. I followed his gaze. Something moved, just at the edge of light. Not a shape, a presence. Like watching gravity bend, a shimmer that made your skin crawl backward. And then it was gone. Back to the antechamber, Voss ordered. Now! We regrouped in silence. No one wanted to be the first to ask what we'd all felt, because saying it out loud made it real. Lena sat cross-legged, scanning the air with her instruments. The electromagnetic readings are spiking. It's like the base is waking up. Then we shut it down, Voss said. Thompson laughed, but it was dry and cracked. You think we're still in control? No one answered. The lights along the hallway behind us flickered, then dimmed one by one, like something was coming. I checked my oxygen levels. The readout flickered, then glitched, flashing an unfamiliar symbol. Not a warning. A glyph. I blinked and it was gone. Thompson stood. I can't stay in here. I can't. The sound cut him off. Like a voice, but deeper. Older. It wasn't spoken. It was placed in the center of your skull, bypassing ears, words, thought. It said only one thing. Observe. And then the wall behind us shimmered and opened, revealing another corridor. Lit. Waiting. Voss cursed under his breath. We moved forward. No one objected. Not out of agreement, but because turning back suddenly seemed worse. As we moved, the corridor shifted, walls widening, ceilings breathing. The design was impossibly fluid. It wasn't made to be navigated. It was made to adapt. More signs of previous visitors, dropped equipment, a torn flight manual, even a shattered camera labeled with a year, 1918. That's when I stopped walking. Guys, I said slowly, that's not just impossible. That's before powered spaceflight even existed. No one moved, because just ahead, on the floor, was a human jawbone. Fresh, still bloodied, and beside it, a set of footprints leading deeper into the dark. We didn't speak, not even when the walls began to close silently behind us, trapping us inside. We didn't speak as the corridor sealed behind us. No hiss of air, no mechanical clunk, just the smooth, silent shifting of alien metal folding shut like a patient mouth. I reached out instinctively, fingers brushing against the now seamless wall. Cold, dry, impossibly smooth. Lena swallowed. Her breath fogged the inside of her visor. That wasn't a door, she whispered. It was a decision. We pressed onward, the corridor ahead pulling us with a quiet urgency none of us could explain. The soft floor lights reactivated with each step, illuminating a path we had no choice but to follow. The architecture had changed, becoming more refined, symmetrical, as though leading to something deliberate. The deeper we moved, the louder the hum grew. Not in decibels, but in pressure. It had slipped from a subtle tremor to something alive, an inaudible resonance pressing into bone and thought. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, not sure if I was expecting to see someone following or if I was afraid I'd see no one at all. Thompson stumbled suddenly, catching himself on the wall. "You feel that?" he hissed. "What?" I asked, stepping back. He looked up at me, eyes glassy, voice low. The curve of the hall just shifted, like it bent while I was blinking. I scanned the corridor. He wasn't wrong. The passage had been a gradual incline before. Now it sloped down sharply, the walls closer, almost pulsing. Lena checked her scanner, brows furrowed. My mapping data just reset. It's looping us, but the distance traveled doesn't match the internal geometry. None of this makes sense. "It's not supposed to," Thompson said. "It's not human. Why are we pretending it ever was?" Voss, silent until now, spoke flatly. "We keep moving. Fear is useful until it becomes weakness." Thompson bit back a response, jaw tight. He looked like he wanted to scream or bolt, maybe both. We moved on. Eventually, the hallway ended, or rather, opened, into a towering cylindrical chamber. Dozens of levels spiraled upward around a hollow center, each rimmed with narrow walkways and dark doorways. The air shimmered faintly, as if heat or static rolled through it. At the heart of the room floated a sphere, roughly the size of a truck, composed of interlocking metallic panels that shifted with a soft ticking rhythm. It wasn't just floating, it was hovering in defiance of everything. No propulsion, no suspension, just held there, unnaturally still, like an idea made physical. Lena approached it with the reverence of someone entering a sacred temple. "It's not a reactor," she breathed. "It's a map." She tapped a control on her wrist and activated a directional scan. The sphere responded. Lines of light erupted from its surface, etching patterns into the air. A three-dimensional star map unfolded. Planets, moons, celestial bodies rotating slowly around a central point. I recognized Earth, Mars, Jupiter, but beyond them, constellations I didn't know. Systems unrecorded. Stars that shouldn't exist. "This is older than our solar system," Lena said, staring up at the projected galaxy. "This isn't just a chart. It's a record. A history. Then what the hell is it doing on the moon?" Thompson asked. Voss didn't answer. He was staring at the walls, watching something I couldn't see. I turned back to the sphere, tracing the lines to the center, where a single red point pulsed, surrounded by dead space. Lena noticed it too. "That's here. The moon. It's marked." As if summoned, the map retracted suddenly. The sphere folded inward, its pieces clicking into place like a puzzle being sealed. Then the floor beneath it opened, and the sphere descended slowly, vanishing from sight without a sound. The hum intensified. "Move," Voss ordered. "Now!" We followed a new set of lights that flared along one of the walkways, leading into an adjacent corridor. As we moved, I caught brief flashes from the corners of my vision. Walls shifting, symbols blinking, shapes behind glass that didn't reflect us. The layout changed again. The sterile silver corridors began to darken, textures growing more organic, the air thicker. The metal walls were now ribbed, veined with threads that pulsed faintly, like capillaries beneath skin. Lena looked uneasy. "This isn't just architecture. It's responsive. It's part of something." We entered what could only be described as a research chamber. Half the room was lined with containment cylinders, each filled with a viscous, greenish fluid. Floating inside, preserved bodies. Humanoid, but wrong. Too tall. Fingers jointed 3 times. Heads elongated, lacking mouths. The sockets where eyes should have been were filled with a glimmering film. Thompson gagged. "Christ, are they dead?" Lena shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't think they were ever alive. At least not like us." One of the containment units cracked slightly as we passed. A faint hiss escaped. We stopped breathing. The hiss faded. The crack remained. No one touched it. Instead, we approached the far wall, where an altar-like pedestal rose from the floor. Upon it sat a small device, shaped like a deformed heart. Metallic, warm, pulsing faintly. Without hesitation, Lena reached for it. "Don't," I snapped. She didn't stop. Her fingers wrapped around it, and her body went rigid. A jolt ran through the room, like a circuit completing. Lena gasped and dropped it, stumbling back. I saw something, she breathed. Not a memory. A thought. Alien. Like someone opened a window and screamed into my brain. Voss picked up the heart. He held it unmoved. Nothing happened. Thompson looked around nervously. "We should leave this place. Take what we have and go." "You saw the walls close," I said. "There's no going back." He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Then we find another way." The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the walls changed again. The passage behind us was gone. In its place stood a figure. Tall. Humanoid. Wrapped in black. Featureless armor that shimmered with an oily iridescence. No face. No eyes. No movement. Just watching. We froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just its appearance. It was the sensation that followed. Like drowning in silence. Like my name being erased from memory. Then it stepped backward into the wall and vanished. Lena broke the silence. "We're being guided. Tested," Voss corrected. "This isn't exploration. It's exposure." Thompson snapped. "To what? What the hell are we dealing with? Why us?" Voss turned to him, eyes hard. "Because we came. That's all it took." The next door opened without warning. We stepped through into a gallery of horrors. Hundreds of murals lined the walls, etched in glowing lines, depicting wars across stars, creatures bleeding starlight, ships the size of continents cracking apart. Then the images changed, showing us humanity, rockets, satellites, the moon landings, and then this mission, our 4 figures entering the structure. The last image showed us dead, our bodies open and flowering with strange growths. "No," Lena whispered. "No, this isn't prophecy. It's programming. This base, whatever it is, it's anticipating us. We're part of its script," I murmured. Thompson turned slowly to face the exit. "I think someone's already rewritten the ending." He wasn't wrong. We entered another chamber. This one spherical, walls covered in small ports that blinked in an erratic rhythm. At the center, a column rose from the floor, branching into spindly appendages like a tree made of bones. It reached toward us. Then it spoke, not in words, but in memory. I was suddenly back in my childhood bedroom. The sound of my mother humming. The smell of lemon and ammonia. But twisted wrong. The walls were wrong. The air buzzed. I blinked and I was back. Everyone was breathing hard. We were scanned, Lena said. Mentally. It tore through our pasts like paper. For what? I asked. Voss didn't look at us. His voice was distant. To see if we're worthy. Of what? None of us could say. But something shifted in Voss after that. A rigidity, like a decision had settled in his bones. We didn't speak as we exited the chamber. The path split 3 ways. Voss pointed. "We take center. No splitting up." "No," Thompson said. "That's the trap. That's how it works. It wants us afraid. Predictable." Voss stepped toward him. "This isn't a democracy." Thompson's hands trembled, eyes darting. "I'm not dying down here just because you think barking orders is the same as knowing what's happening." "Enough," I said, stepping between them. "We stick together. That's final." They didn't like it, but neither objected. We took the center path. More evidence of others emerged. Shattered tools, handwritten notes, a cracked visor smeared with blood. Someone had been here before. Many, maybe. None had left. At the end of the corridor stood another door. This one was different. It wasn't metal. It pulsed, faintly translucent. Alive. It opened before we could touch it. And beyond, the lights revealed something that made us all stop breathing. A wall of screens. Human faces. Ours. Watching us from different angles. Moments from the last few hours. Each recording perfectly timed, perfectly framed. A delay of seconds, maybe. And in the center, one feed that didn't match any of us. A man in a space suit, face hidden, standing alone in a hallway we hadn't seen. Just watching. The feed ended, and above it, etched into the wall, was a single word. Welcome. No one spoke. No one needed to, because we finally understood what we'd activated. It had been waiting, not for discovery, for visitors, and now was learning, recording, rewriting, and we were part of the next phase. Something was awake, and it wanted to understand us. At any cost. Thompson didn't scream when he died. He didn't even speak. He just walked into the dark corridor, branching off from the observation chamber, and vanished, like he had always meant to go that way. We didn't realize he was gone until the silence grew too loud, until we turned, and he simply wasn't there anymore. Voss shouted his name into the comms. No reply, not static, just a complete absence, like the signal was never there to begin with. We retraced our steps, searching every shadow, every curve of the corridor. But it had changed again. The walls had shifted, stretched. The entrance to the previous chamber was gone, sealed behind that same seamless, unknowable metal. Lena stood still for a long moment, her eyes empty, mouth parted just slightly, as though trying to remember how to speak. It took him, she whispered, like it knew the perfect moment. When we were distracted, when we were afraid. He didn't cry out. I said, more to myself than her. Whatever happened, it wasn't violent. It was willing. He was unraveling before that. Voss muttered. He'd already cracked. I turned sharply. You're not immune either. None of us are. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The haunted look in his eyes said it all. This place was getting into him too. We walked in silence for a while. The halls had become taller now, cavernous, lined with organic ridges that made it feel like we were walking through the ribcage of something ancient and long dead, or still dying. The ambient hum had faded. In its place, there was something worse. Breathing. Faint. Wet. Rhythmic. Not ours. The path led us into a chamber unlike the others. Vast and low-ceilinged. The floor made of translucent panels that glowed softly beneath our feet. Through them, we could see what lay below. Rows of bodies, dozens, maybe hundreds, preserved in floating suspension tanks. Some were human, some not, some in between. Lena knelt by the nearest tank, her hand trembling as she wiped condensation from the glass. Her own face stared back, eyes closed, body motionless. Identical suit, identical scars. I felt the world tilt beneath me. That's not possible, I said. That can't be. It is, she whispered. It's me. Voss walked the row slowly, his footsteps echoing too loud in the silence. He paused at another tank. Inside was me, and down the line him. Multiple copies, each slightly different, slightly older, slightly wrong. Some had injuries. Others were uniforms from different decades. One of them, the version of me, was missing its eyes. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. We're not the first version of ourselves, Lena said. We're not even the first us to make it this far. The facility is simulating iterations, Voss murmured, running tests, trapping us in loops, and storing the results. She looked up at me with tears pooling in her visor. Do you remember how we got here? What? Do you remember the launch? The exact moment? The final countdown? The stars we passed? I opened my mouth, but nothing came. I could remember training, yes. Briefings. The long silence of space. But not the launch. Not the sky. Just waking up on the moon. We were never sent, she said. We were created. This place didn't wait for us. It built us. No, I said, shaking my head. That's no. We were chosen. I had a life, memories, a family. Memories it gave us, she said, to make the test feel real. We're not simulations, Voss growled. We bleed. We think. Lena stood slowly. So does a well-made copy. Before we could argue further, the lights above us dimmed. A tone rang through the chamber, deep and resonant, like the toll of a bell underwater. The tanks below began to vibrate, then rise slowly, submerging into darkness. All but three. Ours. A message. A choice. Voss was already moving. Let's go. The corridor beyond had changed again. Wider. More refined. The architecture was starting to resemble something ceremonial. A shrine. Whatever built this Lena said, walking beside me. It wasn't trying to communicate with us. Then what was it doing? I asked, cataloging. We passed through a hall of mirrors. Not reflective glass. Polished black obsidian that showed not our physical forms, but our minds. Memories bled across the surfaces as we moved. Shattered images, fractured truths. I saw myself in a hospital, holding someone's hand. A woman. I couldn't remember her name. Then I saw her decay. Fast-forward rot. Skin peeling. Eyes hollow. I turned away. So did Lena. Voss didn't stop. He watched the reflections without blinking, as though willing them to fracture more. We emerged into a dome-shaped chamber with no doors. Just a singular column in the center, wrapped in cables that pulsed like veins. Lena approached it and touched one of the strands. Her eyes rolled back instantly. Her body twitched. Then she let go and gasped, staggering back. What did you see? I asked. She took a long breath. A pause. They weren't gods. They weren't creators. They were wardens. This facility, it's not a temple. It's a prison. I felt the blood drain from my face. What's inside? I don't know, but it's still here. The column began to glow at her words. A slow, spiraling light that ran up its surface. Then the floor beneath us cracked open. No warning. No time to scream. We fell. Not far. Only a few meters, but the impact was enough to jar teeth. We stood in a chamber so vast the ceiling wasn't visible. And at the far end, surrounded by pylons and sigils, lay a containment unit. Oval, black, floating inches above a cradle of light. And inside, curled into itself like a sleeping child, was something alive. Its skin shimmered like mercury. Its form shifted slightly, too quickly to focus. One moment, it resembled a man. The next, a pillar. The next, a star collapsing in slow motion. And then it opened its eyes. I couldn't breathe. Not from fear, but from the recognition. Like I had always known it. It saw us. And smiled. Lena fell to her knees. Voss raised his weapon, but didn't fire. I know what this is, she whispered. It's not a creature. It's a consciousness. A signal given shape. It doesn't exist in our time or space. It's been contained here, sealed inside this framework to prevent it from leaking into reality. Why the moon? I asked. Because Earth listens. Earth explores. And eventually, Earth hears. And we're the response. We're the mistake. The being floated forward, its containment field pulsing. Runes glowed beneath it, ancient and eroding. Cracks formed in the cradle holding it. Dust drifted upward. The prison was failing. And it was waking up. We have to reseal it, Lena said, panic rising in her voice. The facility built us to maintain the barrier, to stop the leak. We're not explorers. We're patches. Voss turned slowly, eyes glazed. No, we're emissaries. It chose us. All these years it waited for someone who could listen. He stepped toward the containment field. Lena shouted, lunging after him. But it was too late. He touched it. The lights failed. All of them. Darkness surged in. I felt myself falling again, not physically, but mentally, falling through endless images. Versions of Earth. Versions of myself. Each ending the same way. With silence. With ruin. With that thing crawling out of the moon. Then, light. I opened my eyes. I was alone. The chamber was still. Silent. The containment unit, empty. Voss was gone. Lena sat in the corner, trembling, whispering nonsense into her calms. What happened? I asked. She looked up, tears streaking her face. It's free, she said. Not fully. Not yet. But it touched him. Used him. And us. We're still part of the system. Just barely. The room around us began to shudder. Cracks split the walls. Alarms we couldn't understand echoed from deep within the base. We have to go, she said, standing unsteadily. Before it decides we're useful. The floor opened again, revealing a long ramp leading up into darkness. Our only exit. We climbed. Not quickly, not confidently, but because the alternative, the thing we'd awoken, waited behind us with infinite patience. An infinite hunger. We didn't speak again until we saw the stars. Not Earth. Not the familiar heavens. Just black void. And the entrance, the one we'd come through, was gone. In its place, a wall, etched with one final message, pulsing softly in the same language that had followed us since we arrived. You have been cataloged. The base went silent. We weren't out. We were in a new cell, a deeper level. The test wasn't over. It had just begun. There was no time. The moment the door sealed behind us, the air changed. Denser, warmer, as though the moon's core was breathing against our skin. We stood in a long, dim corridor, walls undulating subtly, like lungs expanding and contracting. Lena stumbled, gripping her knees. It's adapting. Again, adjusting pressure, trying to keep us alive. I looked down the hall. A faint red glow pulsed at the far end, synchronized with the sound. No, the rhythm we'd been hearing since arrival. Not a machine, not wind, a heartbeat. Lena stood upright slowly, eyes unfocused. It's not just alive, it's aware. I wanted to argue, say something rational. But what rationality could survive this? We moved forward. With each step, the corridor twisted. Slightly too much, slightly off, like it was winding through space that didn't follow normal geometry. At some point, we were no longer walking horizontally. We were ascending or descending. I couldn't tell. Time had become a suggestion. A door waited at the end. Unlike the others, it wasn't sealed. It was open expectantly. We stepped into a command chamber. This one was human, old, dust-covered, built of riveted steel, levers, and analog dials. 1950s-era tech, tangled wires still sparking feebly. A cracked U.S. flag painted across the wall. The scent of burning plastic and mold filled the air. Somehow it was all intact. No lunar dust, no radiation decay. At the center sat a single figure, mummified, slumped in a steel chair bolted to the floor, clad in a faded, tattered military uniform, long decomposed but still bearing the nameplate. Jan Roth. Lena gasped. Roth? No, he vanished. 1964. Supposedly lost over the Pacific during a black ops test flight. He wasn't lost, I said. He was assigned here. They all were. I turned. Screens lined the far wall, still flickering, displaying biosigns, seismic readouts, and one live camera feed. The containment chamber. Boss stood inside it. He wasn't alone. The entity shimmered behind him. No longer asleep. No longer bound. A shape draped in shifting matter. Part smoke, part memory. It didn't move, didn't speak. Just waited. The chamber door was open. He let out, Lena whispered. But it hasn't left. Because it doesn't need to, I replied. It's already spreading. I approached the console. Buttons cracked under my gloves. CRT monitors blinked furiously, displaying a language I only partially recognized. Half English, half the glyphs etched across the facility walls. One message repeated. Thanatos protocol failure. Primary host engaged. Global contingency initiated. There were 4 switches on the panel, a lever locked behind a glass case, and a single analog microphone labeled Last Command. Lena circled the console, tracing her fingers along a dusty clipboard filled with handwritten notes. They tried to kill it, she said. General Roth and his team. They learned containment wouldn't last. They attempted to flood the base with radiation, implode the core, sever dimensional bleed. It failed. The entity adapted. I looked at the lever. The final command. The last resort. I think this activates the kill chain, I said. If we pull it, we won't kill it. Lena said, her voice hollow. But we might seal it. One more time. Long enough, maybe, for Earth to forget again. That's when we heard him. Voss. His voice crackled through the microphone, except we hadn't touched it. Don't do it, he said. I froze. He was standing still in the chamber. Eyes black, skin pale. But his voice, it was calm, measured, familiar. You don't need to fear it anymore, he continued. It's not what you think. It doesn't hate. It doesn't destroy. It remembers. What are you? I asked. I'm you. A part of you that's always known. This isn't a curse. It's a gift. Lena was shaking. That's not him. It's using his body, speaking through it. Why wouldn't it? The voice said gently. Language was always your weakness. You need a mouth to understand. You need eyes to see, But you've been seeing wrong. From the start. Lena stepped forward, gripping the mic. Why us? You were built for this. Each of you. Your genetics. Your minds. Your trauma. You were never random. The project was never about exploration. It was about selection. We're not vessels, I said. We're not conduits. No, Voss replied, smiling faintly. You're bridges. Something pulsed across the room. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. I looked at Lena. She was pale, her breath shallow. Then I saw it. The other her. Just behind her, reflected in the flickering screen, a second Lena. Standing still, eyes glassy, skin wrong. I lunged and tackled her as the figure moved. We hit the ground hard. The other Lena passed through us like vapor, dissipating. She looked at me, stunned. It's replicating now, trying to split us. Blur the real from the constructed. We're already blurred, I said, but we're not done yet. I stood and reached for the lever. I'm pulling it. No, the voice said through the speakers. You're not escaping. Not this time. The walls shimmered. The ceiling peeled. Suddenly, we were back in the corridor. The beginning. The false beginning. The moment we first descended into the base. Except it was wrong now. Thompson was there. Alive. Smiling. Voss was behind him, hand on his shoulder. Lena stood beside me again, but younger. Unscarred. And me, split across the glass surface of the wall. Dozens of versions flickering, each trapped in a loop of decision and failure. It's trying to reset us, Lena whispered. Cycle again. Start the test from scratch. No, I said, grounding my boots into the floor. No more loops. I closed my eyes. I remembered the console, the switches, the final lever. I reached for it, in memory, and pulled. A sound like thunder in reverse. A light that didn't shine. It peeled. Reality fractured. We fell again, but not through air. Through layers. Through moments. We hit the ground. The real ground. I knew it because it hurt. Lena groaned beside me, coughing. Dust filled the air. The base groaned above us. We were outside, on the lunar surface. And behind us, the monolith was collapsing inward, imploding in complete silence. No explosion. No dust cloud. Just vanishing. Each piece blinking out like pixels. It was gone in seconds. The crater was empty. Flat. Dead. Lena crawled to her knees. Did it work? I don't know, I said. I think we closed it. A long pause. Then, from the horizon, a signal flare. A rescue beacon. Someone had found us. We didn't speak during the lift. The rescue crew, private contractors in UN gear, said nothing, just moved with precision. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer explanations. We boarded a black shuttle. Sleek. Quiet. Earth grew larger in the window. And yet, I felt no relief. Only silence. Hours later, we landed. Not on any launch pad I recognized. Not at any base I'd ever seen. A white facility. Hidden. Remote. We were escorted inside. Medical exams. Scans. Questions. Clinical. Emotionless. Then a room. Padded. Bright. I sat across from a man in a suit. He smiled. Expression blank. Do you remember your name? He asked. I hesitated. I remembered so many names now. Too many. Yes, I said. But not just mine. He nodded. Good. That means it's working. What is? He stood. The merging. He walked to the wall and tapped a panel. It slid open, revealing a massive chamber. Inside, dozens of pods, each holding me. Each version, frozen mid-expression. Some screaming. Some smiling. He looked back at me. You were the first to make it back fully intact. And for the first time, I understood. I hadn't escaped. I had been retrieved. For study. For dissection. Not as a survivor. As a sample. Lena never left the moon. Or maybe she did. Or maybe there never was a Lena. I stare at my hands now, unsure if they're mine. I hear things in the walls, pulses, breaths. Sometimes I dream of other moons. Other stars. Sometimes I hear Voss humming. And sometimes I hear myself, screaming from a room just down the hall. The light never turns off in here. The clipboard in my lap always reads the same message, scribbled in block letters across the top. Project Thanatos. Observation Cycle 371 complete. New branch commencing. I want to run, but I know now. There's nowhere left to go. Only forward. Into the next test.